Welcome back to another episode of Divorce at Altitude. This is Ryan Kalamaya. This week, we're getting the band back together because I am joined by our co-host, the lovely and esteemed Amy Goscha. Amy, how you doing?
Hey Ryan, great. I'm doing awesome. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's been a while since we
Yeah.
have done a podcast together. As we're recording this, it's in September, and my daughter, who is 7 years old, just started second grade. I know Hunter, your son, he's not yet in school, but we thought the timing would be right for us to talk about back to school.
Yeah, and I can't believe that your daughter's in second grade. They grew up so fast, don't they?
Indeed, and it's been a very fast year. I feel like she's grown, doubled in size. And for people that have, either are looking at going through a divorce, who have recently been divorced, this time is a difficult time. And when you're talking about timing and whatnot. So, what are the issues that you see in back to school for divorced parties?
Yeah, I think just like divorce or not, it's just like a period of transition for families. So if you're going through divorce, like you're looking at the transition of your kids' schedule from summer to like their school schedule, right? And so if you've already been divorced, you have a parenting plan that's in place. And so you look to that to see, is there a change from summer parenting time to school parenting time? There's some parenting plans that have a different, more like flexible schedule in the summer versus the school year. So that can change. But if you're also just going through a divorce, that's something also to think about is how do you want to fashion your parenting plan, during the school year? Like how far do you and your soon to be ex-spouse live from each other? Does it make sense to have one parent have the children more during, the school week versus the weekends? So that's kind of where I start. And I think another issue that really comes up is just kids are so busy these days with, extracurricular activities. And so it's deciding on, not only, making sure that they get to school and their homework's done, but what other activities are they in? Are they in sports? Are they, doing some kind of extracurricular, academic camp? What are their needs? Like, do they need therapy? Are they in speech? So it's just, it can get kind of complicated.
Indeed, it can. And I think it's important when the children, when there's this transition from summer to school time, it is one of those things where it can cause a lot of anxiety for both the parents and the children. And I think it's helpful for everyone, the parents, even though they might be separated or, fighting like cats and dogs, that they get or try to get on the same page. And with the kids, it's maybe talking about them and the other parent about how do the kids explain that they're different, different parents picking them up. Because if the divorce happened over the summer or there's been a change, that might be something that you talk with your children about, and you reassure them that they're going to see the same, hopefully they're going to see the same friends, but also coming up with a game plan on how to your kids explain to their friends about what is going on. And that is one of those things that could happen at soccer practice. It could happen at school. I also think that going back to school, it's one of those things where you probably want to talk to the teacher and explain to them, "Hey, we're divorced, and if there's an agreement that it obviously depends on the nature of the relationship. If people cannot be in the same room as each other, and as we're recording this, COVID is kind of rearing its ugly head again, and so people are concerned about being inside indoors anyways. But if there's that situation where parents can't breathe the same air because they just don't like each other, explaining that to the teacher that maybe there needs to be separate parent-teacher conferences, and just alerting the teacher so that there's no awkward situations. But certainly getting on the same page for the schedule when it comes to extracurriculars as well as the school, I think, is absolutely critical and top of mind right now.
Yeah, and I also think as parents, we want our kids to succeed, and for them to succeed, they have to have stability. And when you're going through a divorce, or if you're a co-parent, if you can communicate with your soon-to-be co-parent or co-parent about consistency, that really helps kids. And that's kind of where, as family lawyers, I think Ryan and I see a lot of potential conflict. But hopefully today we'll be able to give you some kind of tidbits on how to resolve those things. One thing I've noticed recently is a lot of my clients do, as Ryan talked about, they talk to the school counselor as well. Like they get those professionals involved, and it's having communication with the teachers, the counselors, as well as making sure that both parents are getting the same information.
Yeah, and I think at least the studies, show, children are resilient, but it does take, some time for them to digest that their parents are going through a divorce or have separated. And so I think it's this balancing act of coordinating with the teacher as well as the counselor. But if it's an older child and they get one bad grade, or they just don't seem as involved, and the teacher expresses some concern, is that reason to completely freak out? It might be normal. There might be some other reasons, but yeah, getting on the same page as, do we need to bring in a therapist and a counselor for the child? But certainly having that dialogue with the other parent, and being mindful, because it can change the schedule, and just making sure that the children feel supported through, I mean, they're going through a change with their parents, but they're also going through a change in that they're at a new, they're in a new grade. They might be at a different school, and there's just going to be a lot of change going on.
Yeah, and I think another part that we see as family lawyers is, we don't want to talk about money with, kids, but, everything, every activity that they're signed up for, if they need a therapist, costs money. So just getting on the same page with your co-parent on, how that's paid, and really making sure that it's clear in the parenting plan, or the separation agreement, how those costs are being allocated. And I think just thinking about a solution, when you're drafting a parenting plan, if you think there's going to be an area of contention, like put in your parenting plan what you guys do agree to. If you agree that, your son is going to be in soccer, say, soccer is an agreed upon expense, or, the kid is going to be in therapy, with this therapist, and that's an agreed upon expense.
Right, and I think that, making sure that those extracurricular activities, if it's a continuation of something that they've been doing in the past, that's one thing. If it's a new activity, the communication piece of the parents and the parenting plan, at least what we typically do, Amy, is have a provision about talking amongst the parents before discussing it with the children, so that there's not this, well, your dad or your mom is not letting you do this thing that you and I have already discussed, and that it's this blame game, and really making sure that that agreement, and certainly we've had situations, Amy, where our clients, they may not be able to afford a particular activity, or to share in the cost of a particular activity, but they say, listen, if you want to sign them up and you want to pay for it, great. But those extracurricular activities, they can be very expensive. It can be, up here in the mountains, the skiing, hockey, ice skating. Those can really change the dynamic when it comes to child support. But it's also something that is a huge time commitment, and is something that parents need to make sure they address, because they oftentimes come up. I mean, my daughter, we're having to navigate, for the first time, soccer, lacrosse, and then our son, and just, it's kind of this divide and conquer. And that, reminds, me, in terms of what you had said about the transportation, making sure that the parenting plan is clear about, when is there going to be drop offs, and is it going to be at school? Is it going to be at the activity? When is it that's going to happen? And then you've also got the kind of weekend activities, in the weekends, when it's going to be a little bit different, right?
Right. Yeah, and I know that, every parenting plan, even, my own parenting plan that I have, it can't cover every scenario. An example is like Hunter at his dad's house lives on the lake. And so my ex-husband and I decided to put Hunter in like training for like water survival, and it's every single day. So you have to really navigate and work together with your co-parent. And and there are situations that people can't do that. So Ren and I will, give you some ideas as to how, we can put other professionals in place to help you. But that is the best, thing you can do for your kids, remembering that conflict between the two of you really negatively affects your children. So if you think about that, I think about that a lot, when I'm communicating with my co-parent. How is this going to create conflict, or is this going to, aid the co-parenting relationship? So that always helps.
And what you said is 100% true in terms of that no parenting plan can predict everything, but there are various things that you can do. One is that you can provide detail in the parenting plan, so it can be specific in terms of time, in terms of how you communicate. We had a podcast with a divorce coach who talked about dealing with a narcissistic high conflict personality on the other end. And when that communication kind of regime or protocol is going to be different than people who are getting along. And so, but the communication is so critical to providing that consistency. And at least from my perspective, that, a parenting plan is helpful when it spells out how do you address this. It could say that at the beginning of the school year or 2 weeks before the school year. I mean, the school calendar is usually released in the spring or early summer for the upcoming school year. And to either sit down or have a dialogue that you really kind of look at that school calendar. In here in Aspen, we just had a pretty big change in the school calendar. So that it used to be that they got out on Wednesdays early, and now they have done away with that, and they've added a significant number of Fridays and Mondays for teacher work days. And really, I mean, Amy, you and I, when we're going through with clients, we sit down with those school calendars. They're usually available online, and I think that that is something that oftentimes parents, they kind of understand, but they, when you really kind of look at the holidays and how that's going to transition or really relate to that school time, it really, you have to kind of look at it. And I think it's helpful for parents early on to talk about what that school calendar looks like in the context of their parenting plan. And when you do a calendar, we use Child Custody Exchange, an app and the software, and I find it particularly helpful for myself and clients to look at the calendar. So when you see every other week in an equal parenting time, well, that might result in a parent having 3 straight weeks for Thanksgiving. The parent might have their normal parenting time for the week before Thanksgiving, and then the parenting plan says, it's an odd numbered year. They get Thanksgiving, and then they can make an argument. Well, my natural alternating week is the following week after Thanksgiving, and is that really what you intended? But you don't really see those aspects when you're just looking at the parenting plan. If you look at a calendar, it really can matter.
Yeah, and I just dealt with that yesterday in mediation, attorneys, mediator, clients, and we had exactly what you said. We had alternated, the spring break and fall break, and it could result, and it was an every other week parenting schedule. So that could have resulted in 3 weeks to one parent. That can also happen with like every other weekend when you're looking at, like Labor Day and Memorial Day. So I think that's really a good tip to make sure that you're looking at a calendar and color coding it to really see, how it's impacting, the time. And also if you have kids that are in different schools, like elementary, middle, and high school, like they might have different breaks. So it just gets pretty complicated.
Okay, so we're talking about disputes, and and giving tips for ameliorating or resolving those disputes. One of the most common disputes, Amy, that we see, and kind of the time has somewhat passed in terms of disputing or having an argument about what school the kids go to. So talk to me about your experience and thoughts on the school conflict.
So a lot of clients, like hopefully they come and they're talking to us earlier than the summer, but there can be disputes with, I'm enrolling, son in this school and, ex-spouse may not agree with that. Then there's a school choice issue. And essentially, we need to deal with that stuff prior to the summer, because if you're trying to get a court hearing, the court might not be able to handle it in time. So, one of the things that you could do in that kind of situation is hire an arbitrator to, make that decision. I have a case, right now where it's in the middle of the school year and the PRE has recommended for a relocation. And so now we're going to have to look at, maybe switching schools, mid-year. But sometimes it's not a good position to take when you're going into court, because the court might not want to see the kid uprooted. So, it does get kind of complicated, on those things. So.
Yeah, and talking about complications, I mean, as we're recording this in September of 2021, there's a case up on appeal with the Colorado Supreme Court, and it's to determine whether or not the trial court has the ability to essentially serve as a tiebreaker. If a parent wants a child to go to one school and the other parent disagrees and wants the child to go to the other school, it's a little bit unclear from the law. There was a case, Griffin v. Griffin, back when there was, custody, and it essentially said that, the trial court could not act as a tiebreaker. Then we had this, Court of Appeals case. I think it's pronounced Daewoo, that said that the court can, but there's been differences of opinion on what applies. At least for me, I've gone to trial on this case with Judge Boyd in Garfield County, and he determined that he had the ability to act as a tiebreaker. I think people oftentimes don't understand how long it can potentially take. So, in one of the situations I've dealt with, the child was literally sitting at home because it was August and they didn't know where they were going to go to school. We filed. There was a motion and a hearing, and the court dealt with it on an expedited basis and said the child's going to go to one school. The court issued a ruling on like a Sunday, and really understood the importance. But that's pretty exceptional. And
Yeah.
I know that the bench. I mean, Amy, you've worked for Judge Arkin. It's not their favorite. They don't like dealing with emergencies, but I think a lot of judges do understand that these conflicts can come up, late in the summer. And as you said, there are potential other options. So if parties agree to use an alternative dispute resolution, they can, use. I've seen a PCD, a parenting coordinator decision maker, and then most of them will ask for confirmation that they have arbitration authority. And I had a client that over the summer that she went, on her own with a professional, an arbitrator. It was a family law attorney. She presented her case why the children should go to school in Boulder in one school, and the husband, he or the father, he presented a different, he argued for something different, and the arbitrator made a decision that it cost them some money, but they got a decision, and there was no real issue on whether or not the trial judge did or did not have, authority, because they essentially agreed that the arbitrator and PCDM had the authority in that circumstance. But that is really something that I think a lot of people who don't have family lawyers, and even people that are working with maybe less experience, they might not know that that's even an option.
Yeah, and I think that dovetails into what else, Ryan, can a parenting coordinator decision maker, do? What other types of disputes can they help with?
I just reached an agreement on in another case where we gave we agreed to a PCDM. and the decision maker had, we agreed, had the tie-breaking authority to decide what sports. So, for me, I used to be a Denver Broncos football or season ticket holder, and I love the Broncos. But I'm not sure how I feel about my son playing football, and people can differ on what activities they think are in the best interest. Medical treatment. One thing we've got right now is, children that are 12 years old, they're eligible for a COVID-19 vaccine. And, can a PCDM resolve that decision? It's a medical decision. And just as a reminder, we've got a series, and we explain what a PCDM is and what those professionals do, but you have to agree to a decision maker. The court can appoint a parenting coordinator, but you have to agree to a decision maker. But judges, they are reluctant to just jump in there and make a decision on a vaccine. If you don't have a PCDM, but we're seeing a lot of fallout from COVID that relates to these issues.
Yeah, and I would say I'm seeing more PCDMs, parties agreeing to them. And, I mean, not only do judges probably not want to hear those types of issues, but also, in the metro area, if you file a post-decree motion regarding, a sport, a sports camp or something, like the camp will be done before you get a ruling. I mean, it's just so far out to try to resolve those things through the court. So people are needing some other way to resolve those types of issues. And so I think, PCDM really is helpful for parties, because the PC part I kind of equate to as kind of the mediator, kind of the person who's mediating between the two of you. And then the DM part of it is, if you guys can't reach a decision, then, at least a decision is made for your child.
And I think that there's some value in having institutional knowledge of a PCDM or an arbitrator for child, related activities. And, that also brings up special needs. And that, when you go back to school and if a child's on an IEP or and has special needs, that is something that the parents, Amy, we've dealt with a lot of special needs cases, and the parents quickly every case is unique about the particular needs of the child, and judges in their defense, they might not have that same exposure or that same background to really, and nor do they have the time to really dive in. So how can parties work together in a back to school time when special needs are involved?
I mean, a lot of times how I see my clients deal with it is, if you do have a child that's on an IEP, a lot of times there will be like a meeting with all of the professionals. So if both parties can make sure that they're attending those meetings, of course, Ryan and I see those cases where it's like one parent is driving the bus on the IEP and then the other parent might not be as involved. But, both parents really need to be involved, and need to be at that meeting. And I think it can also circumvent conflicts, because it's just everything comes down to communication. If there's not communication regarding your kids issues, and if you're not supportive of them and on the same page, then there's going to be conflict. So I think that's helpful. I've had people sit down with a child psychologist, or like a mediator early on to kind of work through some of those issues. They can appoint a PCDM. I think it's just, there are a lot of avenues where you can get third parties to help, if there is conflict.
Right. And I think it goes back to some, a topic or an issue that we somewhat touched on, is that consistency in the routine. And at least in my kind of observation, that is especially important for children with special needs, but it's important for all children. And having that consistency and that stability, and making sure that the parents sit down and really come up with, a game plan on, when is homework going to be done, or when are we going to go to, a doctor's office if it's a routine, but really setting those house rules, being on the same page. And that's especially important the first year that the children are going back to school, because a parent might not be historically as involved in the medical, the special needs, if it's, in that circumstance, but just in general with extracurricular activities or schoolwork, and that they need to make sure that they go in united so that the children can thrive. Because both people, they want to make sure that the children thrive. They might have a difference of opinion as to whether the other parent shares that, but that is at least one thing that comes to mind when we're talking about kind of routine and scheduling.
Yeah, and I think just a few kind of other topics I just wanted to touch on is like social media. I know we've had, a whole podcast about social media, but just being on the same page in both households about social media, because, I've seen where kids, when they're older, if they're teenagers, one parent is more lax, the other parent is more strict, and then they're saying, I don't want to do parenting time at the other parent's house because they have free reign at, the other parent's house. So that can create a lot of problems for children. I've had cases where when you have a blended family, two of the kids were the same age, and one of the kids started a bullying Instagram page of the other kid, and the school district had to get involved. So it's just being aware of, what your kids are doing, trying to be consistent, is really important, because social media, school bullying, those are real, issues that our kids face now. And that can be complicated if parents are not on the same page.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm dealing with a situation right now where a parent is posting various things on social media, regarding, a conflict between the parties, and that one of the children is, old enough where they're following their parent and they're seeing this, and so the social media component, it's a topic that brings up so many different, issues, and whether or not the account is private or public, how old the child is, but it also is in terms of, do children, what age do they, is it appropriate to get them a phone? Like where, if a child is at driving, those sorts of issues where they might have their license and they might have, the ability to drive to school, and that might be new this year. But also, the child might be at soccer practice, and they text their parent, to come get them. And those are the issues that I think frequently come up at this time of year where people are navigating that, for the first time. And the social media is just ever changing. And, there's been a lot of, articles about teenagers and social media. But I'm glad you brought that up, Amy, because it is something that's ever changing. And, it might raise the need to have a provision in a parenting plan. We've done it where, we agree on when the child's going to get a phone, when the child's going to be, on social media, and whether or not parents are posting pictures or various posts, about the children, and they need to make sure that they're on the same page, because one parent might, not feel comfortable with, their picture of their children, or the child, being on Facebook or Instagram. And so just making sure that you're getting back on that same page. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, Amy, but my Facebook, feed is just, it's filled with, back to school, first grade, third grade. Oh my gosh, like I can't believe, he or she has grown up so much. And, that, might be all well and good, but you just need to make sure that, you're on the same page. And that's a little bit different than, saying something disparaging about the other parent and about how they're, not there. And, that obviously is a different scenario.
Yeah, and I think the other issue that I see come up around school is, just if there's significant others that are in the picture. Um, a book I read recently was about trauma by Oprah Winfrey, and it was really good. And it talked about trauma and introducing new significant others. But that comes into play, like who's picking the kids up from school, like you and your co-parent need to be on the same page on, when someone gets introduced, who's picking the kids up from school, what that new person's role is going to be in your child's life. So that's, another thing that I think a therapist or even like a PCDM. The other role that would mention that we haven't discussed is you can also hire a parenting coach. So that can be helpful, in kind of on your own understanding like, okay, how should I approach this issue? Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what my triggers are, but how can I present this and be a good co-parent? So, that's another, I think, tool that's really helpful for our client.
No, 100%. No, we just recorded an episode with a divorce coach, which is similar to a parenting coach, but a divorce coach can help someone deal with a tremendous amount of change. I mean, Amy, you can speak from experience about how difficult it is to go through a divorce, but you compound that with going back to school. And that is a change in and of itself. It might be when you go to kindergarten or high school for the first time, or going to college. I mean, I've certainly been in touch with a number of clients who it's their first year of having a kid in college and making sure that there's a provision about who's going to pay for it, or and if you're not legally required unless you agree voluntarily in the parenting plan, but having that discussion is a much easier or much more productive event if you have a coach of some sort to kind of walk you through that, so that it's already an emotional time with the amount of change, because it just brings up how your children are getting older. And but then when you compound that with a divorce, it can really trigger a lot of people and result in some unproductive conversations, which doesn't help the children. It doesn't help anyone.
Yeah. And again, I think, I've said this already, but for me at least, and I think it's helpful for clients, when you're dealing with your children, it sounds simple, but if you can make sure that your communication is not going to create conflict, don't be a doormat and let someone run all over you. But if it's going to not create conflict, that's going to be much better for your child, because conflict is, in the research is the number one, thing that causes problems for kids emotionally and with attachment and everything.
Well, Amy, I know we've done some other podcasts with guests, and we'll have those referenced in the show notes for people that want to get more information and take a deeper dive on a parenting coach, a divorce coach, a parenting evaluation, or a PCDM. The various things that we've talked about. But I think that that is enough for people to kind of have their heads spinning, and we don't want to take them to school too long. So let's put a wrap on that. And thanks again for joining us on Divorce at Altitude.